Yes, we can see.
You
Yes,
can
we
see
can
my
see your screen, yeah.
screen. Okay, so I just go in the slideshow. Okay, so this afternoon, which is evening almost in my place, we are going to talk about the latest resolution, which you have not measured yet. And to be honest with you, it's new, so and it is still complicated, and there are many questions to measure there. So I'm sure that's why Eve is here. So it's normal that you haven't measured yet because many countries are not yet measuring it, and we are not pushing it yet, to be honest with you, because we are trying to simplify the questions that are used to measure it. So it's a resolution called on work relationships. So I'll go through it, but before I go to that level, since you were asking questions on ICLS yesterday, and as we mentioned this morning, we'll just take a few minutes to mention again what is the international standard setting mechanism on labor statistics. Because it's an international standard setting, it's actually followed also by the UN system. And then I will go to the resolutions that were adopted in the last one on 20th ICLS. And then I will come to the work relationship resolution, its classifications, and some of the selected groups that also explain why, that add an explanation on why the 20th ICLS resolution on work relationship was actually adopted. So it is still new, and we are promoting now the measurement by countries, but there are only a few countries that have really started measuring it, mostly developed economies. Even then, I don't think all of them, and if probably we agree that not even all developed economies are measuring it. So very quickly, let me talk about the international standard setting mechanism. It is the International Conference of Labor Statisticians. I'm sure many of you haven't heard about it. You can see my slide changing, right? Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see them. So I just don't want to.
You can see.
We have that problem this morning. We couldn't see the slide changing. So the International Conference of Labor Statisticians is the some kind of authoritative setting mechanism in terms of labor statistician. And it's an international one, so it's really, it's led by countries, it's not the ILO. The ILO is just a host and acts as a secretariat. We prepare the documents as requested by country, but we don't write the definitions ourselves. It's the labor statisticians from ministries of labor and from national statistical offices. In fact, we send usually the official invitation to ministries of labor, asking them to relay also to the national statistics offices. It's an official ILO meeting. It's part of the official ILO meeting. ILO as an international organization, not office. So the organization is an organization of member states. It meets every 5 years since 1923. It's the oldest statistical setting mechanism within the UN. And in fact, I'm not sure if there are many other similar setting mechanisms in the UN than this one. There are other statistical associations. One of them is the ISI, which is like from 1885 or 1880. But the ICLS is one of the oldest setting mechanisms in terms of that is managed by the UN. So since 1923, every 5 years. It's a tripartite structure because of the ILO character of tripartism. So it has governments which are represented by NSOs and ministries of labor, but it has also employers and workers representatives. So they follow because of, not because they are technician necessarily, but because they have to make sure that we are measuring what is important for the policy needs, and they have to provide guidance on those definitions, for example, or the measurement on the way, or the concept that needs to be measured, or the concept that are important, or the concept that should be developed by statisticians. And then you have international and regional organizations that are observers. Most of the UN organizations are observers. A number of regional development banks, for example, are observers. AFDB has been even supporting, AFDB, that's the African Development Bank, has been even supporting participation of countries there. ADB also does participate. So you have even regional organizations that are attending as observers. So this morning you can see on your right the last two of them. So the 19th ICLS was in October 2013, and the 20th ICLS was in October 2018. They are usually in Geneva. Actually, not usually. They are always in Geneva. Maybe with exception in the Second World War, where some of the ILO conferences had to be moved to some countries such as Canada. So they are always in Geneva and in the ILO conference rooms, conference facilities. So the main objectives, as we mentioned yesterday, and Eve touched on this, is to provide guidance to countries for their national labor statistics, to promote the coherence in concept, and that's really one of the many reasons. There has to be coherence among countries in concept and method across all sorts of data that are related to labor statistics, not just among statisticians, but also among national accountants, for example, industry, among national accountants, for example, occupations, and so on, and various areas. So it aims also to promote international comparability. And one key area you can understand easily is unemployment rate. It has to mean the same thing in Afghanistan as in Canada or in Argentina or in South Africa or in France. When you talk about unemployment rate, it has to be measuring the same thing the same way. Otherwise, it's not anymore possible to compare them. And one of the role of the ICLS is also to set priority for the futures, as I will show you in the next slides. So basically, it's the same standard mechanism that decides what the international community of labor statisticians should be developing, what should be the next topic that are important in terms of developing standards. So that's also the ICLS that decide in which area we should be working in the next future, for example, in the next one, which is 2023. So the guidance of the ICLS are provided in using two instruments that are called resolutions and guidelines. So I will show you some of those examples, and then I will mention what is the difference between the two when we are concretely giving example of what is a resolution or is a guideline. Just to mention before we go to a detailed resolution, the process, how it happens. It's a 5 years process, by the way, between one conference to the other. And the reason is, you can understand, it takes time to develop methodological work. It takes time. And even if the conference is usually every 5 years, sometimes some topics take us 10, 15, even 30 years to change. Peter was mentioning this morning that changing the definition of employment, it took 30 years because you don't want to change something that would impact policies, not just statistics, but also policies. So the 13th ICLS on the economic activity was in 1982. So it took us 30 years, almost 31 years, till 2013, until that concept was changed. So it shows you that, you know, there has to be a justification, be a lot of work behind the scene for a resolution to be actually adopted or for guidelines to be provided. So the initial step is for the ICLS to identify topics and issues or areas, or member state or international organization to suggest some request or some topics. And then the ILO, in collaboration with some other international organizations, such as the World Bank, has been helping us on this. The ILO will develop some research and development, some guidance, some topics, some piloting, and so on that specific issues. And once we have some test and some initial document, we do what we call consultation with experts. Often we have an expert group meeting and a technical working group meeting. Sometimes we have city groups. I don't know if you guys heard about one of the non-city group, which used to be called the Delhi group on the informal sector. I'm mentioning it because I may give you again the same example. So this is, it can be city groups, but mostly they are technical working groups. And once we have documents that are ready to share with all statisticians in the country, we do what we call regional consultation. We do at least 5 regional consultation, one in each of the main regions, to make sure that all the countries have been reached and all experts possible have been have contributed, have provided the inputs into the guidance or the draft resolution. Because sometimes not every country can go into a technical working group or city group. So the reason why we do regional consultations is to make sure every country possible has been consulted. And then the last year, which is the 5th year, we have 2 things that we have. One expert group meeting that is done usually around January or February of the same year to finalize the document. And for about 6 months, there are internal discussion on the web. And then the resolution, which means, for example, up to July. And then the documents are ready usually around July, August. 3 months. They have to be available 3 months before the actual conference, which are usually in October. And then the conferences will spend almost 2 weeks. It's almost 2 weeks reviewing the document, discussing before they adopt the resolutions of the guidelines. So it's a technical work, it's a heavy work. So, and that's why the resolutions, once they are there, they have to be robust so that they can be implemented by all countries the same way. And then the following year, because of its, to make it as an official mechanism which goes into the UN system as well, the ILO governing body approves the resolutions or the guidelines. So these are really official mechanism of the ILO as an organization, but also of the UN, which also, in which ILO is part of the UN system. So that's in a summary to give you a broad idea of the ICLS, and to just explain you how strong is this mechanism and how authoritative is this mechanism, and to give you an idea of which topic have been developed since 1923. There are many of them, of course, but that gives you a list here. We are talking about employment, of course, because that's what we have been discussing with you mostly. But you have working time also, wages, income, the salary. With the first one was specifically on the salary in 1972, and then in 1998 we had actually a resolution on all broad employment related income, including income from self-employment. So you have informal sector, you have occupations as well, which are done by resolutions. The ISCO 08 was approved in the revised through various ICLS, the latest one being in 2008, of course. And then you have status in employment. The last one was in 1993 with the 15th ICLS. So you talk about it now. And then other issues that you may be surprised about, like the consumer price index, the CPI, is also is under the ICLS setting mechanism. Any changes on the CPI, we have to go back to the ICLS. Household income and expenditure surveys, yes, also, in case you didn't know. And then you have other issues like labor cost, social security, strike and work, and so on. So it gives you a broad idea. And if you go to the website to see all these ICLS, you can see the resolutions. All the resolutions are on our website since 1923. So you can see all those resolutions if you are interested on a specific one, and you can read it. So that's a nutshell. Any question before we continue? Any clarification before we go ahead? It's clear so far, right? Hello?
Yes, yes, it's clear. But if you go back at one slide, the topics that is covered in ICLS, like
Yes.
some of the topics like household income and expenditure statistics.
Yes.
So usually every country conducting the household income and expenditure survey. So does have this kind ICLS have conference has implication on how we conduct the income expenditure survey? Does have any implication?
Yes. So there have been about, I think, 2 ICLS on household income and expenditure statistics. So the conceptual framework that are used in HICE, as we shorten them, comes from the ICLS. So if you go inside, if you are interested to go deep into those resolutions, I think there are 2 of them, then you will see the definitions of what are the main concepts that are measured inside household income and expenditures. Of course, now there have been an increase in topics. Some HICE includes even food security, for example, which are not in household income usually in the resolution. So they can, the HICE, the current surveys could be broader than what was defined initially, but the core topic of household income and expenditure are defined through the ICLS. So you can go into the resolution and you will see those core topics there. And I am assuming that if there is any change in the core change of those topics, then we have to come back to the ICLS, to the next ICLS. But I haven't seen any concern that there is need to be changing those kind of conceptual frameworks so far. Okay, so any other question, or shall we go to next? Okay, so the next is to focus now on the last one, which is the 20th ICLS of October 2018. So I go through the resolutions that were adopted in 2018, and particularly when I come to the work relationship, I will mention the objective of that, why the resolution was adopted. So, but just before we go there, just to give you an idea of the resolutions that were adopted in the last one. So an ICLS can adopt a number of resolutions, 2, 3, or 4, but sometimes only one when it is a heavy one. Like in the 19 ICLS had the work statistics, and mostly only that, because it was a heavy framework. So it was not easy to put additional resolution except guideline. So, but the last one had a number of resolutions. The resolution 1 being the core resolution that was adopted on work relationship. But you had also a couple of other resolutions, 2 of them on SDGs indicator, because of the the contextual framework of developing methodologies for the SDGs. SDGs on 8.2 on labor rights, which didn't have a methodology, and 8B1 on youth employment, which had no statistical methodology. And then we had another resolution revising the resolution of 2008 on child labor, because the definition of employment had changed. So we had to change also to revise the definition on child labor, which is linked to employment, children in employment, as you can understand. And then there were 4 guidelines issued also during the same ICLS, one on international labor migration, and a couple of them on one on forced labor, the other one on qualification skills, and on cooperatives. Now, I just take the opportunity now to explain you the difference between a resolution and guidelines. So what happened in the process of developing an ICLS resolution is this. So when the guidance or the definitions or the proposed measurement method is not yet agreed yet internationally, or there is not many countries that have implemented it. So we don't have enough practice. So what is usually issued initially, if you want countries to start measuring the same way, is called guidelines. So guidelines are issued to continue, for countries to continue the measurement, noting that there is not enough information to issue a resolution. So basically noting that there is not enough practice to have an authoritative definition on a concept. So that's why initially guidelines are issued. So for example, one of the core guidelines that was issued in 2018 was on international labor migration. We have been developing the measurement on a labor migration of migrant workers since basically since 2003, since the 17th ICLS. But there has not been any agreement so far, except recently in 2018, where we had an agreed proposal, but that has not been implemented by many countries yet. So that's why we still call it guidelines. A second example I can give you, because I will explain you to give you also the future work we are doing, is another guidelines called informal jobs. What happened in the informal sector and informal employment is that we started by issuing a resolution on the informal sector because it was easy to develop in 1998. So the informal sector was issued there on the 16th ICLS because it's very clear. But when it came to informal jobs, it was so difficult in 2003 that only a guideline was issued. And so far we are measuring the informal jobs, meaning informal employment, based on a guideline. But we believe now that there are a number of practice documentation, many countries measuring that the proposal is for the next ICLS is to prepare a resolution on informal employment, which is going to be in 2023. So just to give you already information what is going to happen, it's going to be a resolution. It doesn't mean it will happen. If there is no agreement, it's not going to happen. So it will only happen if there is an agreement of the countries and they think they have enough conceptual framework clear enough for all countries to apply the same way. So that's what we are working on it now. And we have started, there is a working group on informal employment statistics that is being prepared. And the reason why we decided to be the next one is because of the influence of the 19th ICLS and the influence of the 20th ICLS. Okay, so very quickly, let's go directly to the work relationships. Why was it developed? Key reasons. One is because of the 19th ICLS reduced the number of people in employment. So my colleagues have been explaining you. So a number of people who were in employment, particularly for own use production of goods, are not anymore in employment. So the statistics on employment are expected to be reduced for those countries that have high subsistence production, for example. So consequently, those people have to be put somewhere else. So we had to develop in 2013 a new classification of work statistics. Therefore, in 2018, we had to develop a classification of work relationship, not anymore employment, status in employment. So the previous classification was a status in employment. But because we have a new classification on work statistics, we had to develop a new classification of work relationships that covers all the forms of work, the 5 forms of work that you have seen yesterday and today this morning with my colleagues. Another key issue of this resolution is because of a number of employment arrangements that are not anymore standard. So non-standard is a classical ILO term that you may not be familiar with, but it's the forms of the jobs that are not a contractual arrangement between an employee and an employer, or a fixed term employment contract, or a long-term employment contract. So the new form of jobs that are not within those arrangements. And one big example that we usually give is the Uber taxi, for example. We call it the Uberization. I mean, it's a new vocabulary, or the share economy, or the gig economy that I may mention later, was one of the reasons that we had to develop a new classification, because they did not fit into the old classic status in employment of employee, employer, on account worker, and so on. So these are the reasons why we developed, the international community decide to revise the classification of status in employment of 1993 into a new classification of 2018, which is shortened by ICSE 18. You will hear many of my colleagues in the ILO saying ICSE 18. That means the International Classification of Status in Employment of 2018, by opposition of ICSE 93, which is the status in employment of 1993. So the objective of the resolution on work relationship is, of course, to describe the relation between the people and the economic unit. It's more or less the same objective as was the ICSE 93. It was describing also the relationship between somebody who is employed and the economic unit where the person is working, or the relationship with the person who is employed with an employer, if it's an employee, for example. So the broad relationship is the same. The difference is that we go beyond employment. So the same relationship is valid for on-use production, for unpaid training, because everybody works somewhere. Even if you are a volunteer, you work somewhere. You work in an economic unit or in a household or in your own unit. So that relationship is valid for all forms of work, not just for employment. Clear before we go to classification? Any question? So just coming for you to retain these issues of the relationship and the issues of employment on one side and all the other forms of work on the other side, because that will show us two different classifications as we are going to see it. Clear? We can move? Yeah, very quiet. Okay. So what are the classification criteria or the classifications that we have into this new work relationship? Two broad criteria that are used. One is what we call the type of authority, if you can see my slide where I'm showing, and the other one is what we call the economic risk. So these two, they fundamentally describe the current structure of the classification, both in employment and the status at work. So we have in one classification, we have various dichotomy. We have a dichotomy based on the authority and the economic risk, but also we have another dichotomy based on the type of job you are doing, if it's in employment or other forms of work. So just to summarize, within the 20th ICLS on work relationship, we have two classifications. One in employment, which is ICSE 18, which is most important for us because when we describe the employment, we are describing the status in employment based on the priority of employment, as Yves mentioned yesterday. But also we have to have a classification of other forms of work, even if currently our priority is employment. So if we talk about the status in employment only, we have what we call two hierarchies, and those are because of the authority and the economic risk, as I mentioned. When we consider the authority, we have two categories. The one we call independent workers and the other one we call dependent workers. And you can understand what is the link between these two and the authority. So an independent worker is the one who has more authority, if not full authority, on an economic unit. So that's the conceptual framework behind. And a dependent worker is somebody who doesn't have full authority, but depends either partly or entirely on another economic unit or another person who owns the unit. So the authority in an economic unit gives us two groups of workers, one called independent, the other one called dependent. And the economic risk gives us also two groups of workers, which we have already seen yesterday. One for profit, one for pay. Now, what is the link between the two? For those who work for profit, generally they own the unit. So they are the ones who take the risk because they are the owners of the unit. But those who are paid, they are mostly paid. Although they are also risk if the economy, if an enterprise disappears, they will also lose the job. But the risk is mostly on the owner of the economic unit. So we assume that those who are in profit have more risk than those who are simply in wage employment. And if these two dichotomy are clear for you, then I can show you how those are classified now. So just to retain, by authority, you have two groups, independent workers and dependent workers. And by economic risk, you have two groups, those who work for profit and those who work for pay. And this is how those groups are presented. So I'm starting now to show you the groups. First of all, using the authority, or in another way, the dependency on the economic unit. You can see my slide, right? So in terms of the dependency, you have two groups. You have independent workers. Mostly those are those who have more authority on the economic unit. Obviously, these are employers in corporations or owners of household market enterprises, or independent workers that are not employers. They don't have any employee. So operators of corporation without employee, or basically household enterprises that are on account workers. So these are dependent because they own the economic units. And the dependent workers are essentially the employees, plus the contributing family workers, because they work in something that in an economic unit that is owned by their own family members, the father or the mother. They don't own it, they contribute to the family business. And then a new category that we call dependent contractor, I will come back to it when I define, I explain you why this was identified separately. So this is a dichotomy based on authority, and based on the economic risk. Again, we have two groups. Those who are in employment for profit, again, essentially the employers, on account workers because they own the enterprises, but we add also the dependent contractors because they're also working for profit. Although they don't own the full enterprises, they are managing the work for profit. They don't get paid simply, if you want to do dichotomy. The same as contributing family workers, they will be added here because they don't get paid. They don't get a pay or a salary. So the ones who remain as what we call workers in employment for pay are mostly the employees, with 4 categories that have been separated now, and a new category that was separated from employers. So this is one of the innovation of this new resolution. We used to put employers, inside employers, CEOs, for example. But all the CEOs that are paid and they get irregular salaries have been removed from the employers, and they are now considered as owners, operator of corporations. They are CEOs, so they get a pay. So they have been added here. They could also be owners of corporation without employees. So meaning they own enterprises without employees. These are, for example, the individuals who are like in lawyers, for example. They are corporation, but they usually don't have employees, but they are registered in a form of a corporation, even if there are not many people of them. So these are the 2 dichotomies I wanted to show using the classification of status in employment. So you can find them also using the classification of all forms of work, but I prefer to focus only on employment because, of course, it's our main classification that we are looking at. So just to summarize, the new innovation of this XA18 as compared to the previous status in employment are following. We have separate categories included in as employee. So we have 4 new categories: permanent employee, fixed term. Sorry, let me close the door because I'm in office, so it's getting the evening. They're cleaning, so it was noisy. So you have one essential innovation, which is the broader distinction of category inside employees, 4 categories. And just for information, why did it happen? It happened because many countries were already doing this. So resolutions are usually a confirmation often of what many countries are already doing. So these 4 categories were already measured by many countries. So that was the reason why it was put in this resolution. The separate categories for owner manager of incorporated enterprises who are paid, these are CEOs. So that category has been included in the people who are paid as for pay, and essentially a new category of dependent contractor. And that's where I'm going to explain quickly why this new category was developed. It was developed because we couldn't see the difference between, we couldn't see if the person is an employee or a self-employed, because they have contractual arrangement that looks like as if they are in self-employment, but at the same time they don't get a salary, or they operate a business but they don't have full control of that business. And the good example I was giving you is the Uber. The Uber taxi, they have the taxi. The taxi is usually belongs to them. The vehicle belongs to them. But the software that they are using doesn't belong to them, belong to Uber. And they pay a percentage to Uber because of that. So that's a good example of dependent contractors. So because you can't call them employees because Uber doesn't accept them to be employees, although there is one country actually that is, I think the UK has been pursuing the Uber to recognize them as employees. But for us in practice, they are not employee because Uber doesn't recognize them as employee. And this is the example with many other forms of work. The people who are doing the call centers, individual call centers, like in the Philippines, there are many call centers like that. On behalf of a company that is based in New York or in Vancouver, they are the same. They have the same arrangement as well. So they are called dependent contractors. They are providing services to the public using a unit that belongs to them, but with a software that belongs to somebody else. And that's one of the key characteristics of dependent contractor that was included. There are many criteria to define these characteristics, and the questions that used to measure are more than we used to have in the previous status in employment. And that's why I told you there are many countries that are not yet measuring these categories yet. So we are still promoting the measurement of it. Okay, any question before I show you the whole classification, how it looks like? Any question here? Hello?
No, good.
It's still okay, so I was checking.
Yeah, no, good.
It's okay, so I'm checking if you are listening to me, guys. Okay, so the whole classification then looks like this in a summary. So the resolution is quite big actually, so I'm just summarizing it because the moment you will start implementing, we will have to come to you again and discuss the whole resolution, because this is just a summary I'm giving you. So it's 2 classifications embedded into one. One is a classification of status in employment, XA18. In the other one is a classification of status at work for all the other forms of work. also 18 because it's 2018. So the status in employment has 10 categories, and these are the categories. So the employers, as we know it before, even, you know, ICSE 93, a new category is a new group of independent workers, the employees among the dependent workers, and the contributing family worker among the dependent workers. So the dichotomies I was showing you are still there. So two groups, independent workers, dependent workers, and among them, among independent workers, we have employers and independent workers without employees, which used to be on-account workers. We used to call them self-employed or on-account workers. And then we have employees, and then we have contributing family workers. These are the previous groups, basically. But inside those groups, we have, no, and then we have a new group of dependent contractor. It's basically the main new group that has been included. But inside the previous groups, you have a distinction among employers. You have two groups. You have corporations, employers in corporations, and you have employers in household market enterprises. So that we have different policy, if there are policies, in terms of employment when we are studying ICSE 18. And then among self-employed, I'm using the concept self-employed because that's how we used to call them before. But now we call them independent workers without employees. You have again two groups, owner of corporations without employee and on-account worker, as we used to call them, who just have household market enterprises and also without employee. And then among employees, you have the four categories that I mentioned. So these are the 10 new groups by opposition of the 6 groups that we used to have before. One group has been removed, which is the members of cooperatives, because we have realized that they could be everywhere. The cooperatives can be a group of on-account workers. They could also be actually a corporation, even it's a cooperative. So now they have been removed because they can be classified in any of those. It could be a cooperatives of dependent contractors as well, by the way. So only those 10 groups have been retained in terms of ICSE 18, International Classification of Status in Employment of 2018. When you add the status at work, you add 4 other forms of work, essentially. You add 10 additional categories. So, and of course, those categories are also included in those 2 groups. So inside independent workers, you have employers in on-use production of services or in on-use production of goods. So these are household using people employing domestic workers, for example, for on-use production of services or for producing goods for their own consumption. So they use domestic people. And then you have others who are working without employees, mostly actually in on-use production of services and on-use production of goods. It's usually without employees. And inside there, we have what we call directive volunteers, which are independent volunteers among the volunteer work. So independent volunteers, independent volunteers, we will classify them here as independent workers. So these are the volunteers that decide to do the volunteering themselves, by themselves. They are still independent volunteers because it's their decision. And inside dependent workers, you have, of course, also on-use production workers. For example, most of contributing family workers, if they are just helping for on-use consumptions, they will be here. And then you have unpaid apprentices as well and trainees here. Volunteers who are working for organizations, they are dependent because they depend on those organizations. And what we call other workers, other work activities, mostly these are what we call, and Peter probably mentioned this, these are the other compulsory activities, other forms of work that are here. So basically with that ICLS 2018, we have classified everybody, including those in other forms of work. Now, it's easy said, it's 20 category. It's quite difficult to measure currently, to be honest with you. So if you don't measure it, don't be worried, because you are not the only one. There are many countries that are still not measuring it yet because of its difficulties. And Eve can tell you how many headaches we are even having for countries who are measuring already. To produce the code for this, it's a quite long code. I mean, if we give you an
Yes,
example,
I can
whatever,
fully confirm that. It's very complicated.
it's a very complicated one. Compared to the old code, it's a very
Yes.
complicated. Exactly. So even ourselves, we are having headaches trying to help countries. Of course, we are advising countries to measure, but we are prioritizing 19 ICLS, and then later on the measurement of XA18. And if we measure already XA18, that's enough. We already, so what if just said that is complicated? It's just X18. It is this 10 category. It's not even yet the 20 category. So it tells you how complicated is this new classification. But you know, the more the economy gets complex, the more we try to measure the complexity. And that's why we reach this kind of resolutions, because we are trying to measure the complexity. We are trying to respond to the request of the public on the complexity. Okay, so any question before we move to, I want to show you a number of categories that either explain why we measured also again this work relationship, or also that explain the work that is still going on because of that. But before we go, any question here? It's either very clear or it's not that clear at all.
So we have in 20 categories. So are these categories are the mutually exclusive or inclusive?
If you are in one classification, they will be mutually exclusive. If you are in XA18, they have to be mutually exclusive. When we are talking about the main job, remember again, so in one job, which is the main job, they will have to be mutually exclusive. But of course, you could be an employee in your main job and become an employer in a secondary job because you have a little business. So if you have multiple jobs, then they are not exclusive. You could be employee in one job and employee in another job. You could be employee in the main job, which is actually, there are many people like that. And you are an employer or an independent contractor or an on-account worker in your private household market enterprise. But in the same job, usually the main job and the same classification, XA18, they are exclusive. But when you go to the classification in the status at work, they are not exclusive anymore. And this morning, Peter mentioned that you could be in many forms of work. So they are not exclusive anymore. You could be an employee in a corporation who is at the same time directly volunteering for something else. You could be a permanent employee of the government who is helping an organization based as an organization-based volunteer. So once you get into the status at work, they are not mutually exclusive anymore because the forms of work are not mutually exclusive. They are exclusive only when you are in employment and on one job, on the main job. Then they become exclusive. Okay, any other question? I don't see the comments. I cannot see the comments. So Peter, I hope you are looking at the comments if there are questions. Hello?
Thanks, Titi. It was clear. And how about like if you are using these 20 categories, and how the policymakers or those who are working in the Ministry of Labor how it will guide them. Don't you think it will be a bit confusing to them how they produce policies based on these statistics?
Good question. It may be confusing for them as it is still confusing even for the measurement. But just to explain you, I mean, so that you are not worried. When you are in ICLS 18, they are actually more helpful for the policy because you get more details for a better policy. One clear example is for employees. It's important to know, not just to know that somebody is an employee who has a salary, but you need to know mostly those short-term and casual employees. The more you have economic crisis, the more these groups tend to increase, even the 44, the apprentices. So it's important for the policies to know these categories separately. So the details is meant to contribute to increasing the policies, to improving actually the policies. You need to know, for example, if there are more employers in household market enterprises that have usually their own businesses. This means they have their own businesses. This means also they are not corporations, so they are not yet covered by certain regulations like taxation, for example. So the detail has improved the policy. If you are in one category, like ICSE 18, if you are in one classification, those details, in fact, your question is one of the justification also of having ICSE 18 is to facilitate, to give more information for policies. But of course, when you go in all forms of work, it becomes complicated for ministries. Now, it's complicated for government and ministries, but not that, because government will be focusing mostly on the priority groups, on employment. So government's official will be focusing on jobs creation and employment. But there are many researchers, there are many other universities, there are other NGOs that are interested in people who are working, for example, in own-use production of goods and services. Now we have also an SDG indicator on that. On time spent in own-use provision of services, for example, in Goal 5. Eve was mentioning yesterday the SDGs in Goal 5, which is mostly under UN Women, but we have one indicator under the ILO, but there is another indicator under UN Women on the time spent on unpaid care in the provisions of all kinds of services, but whose measurement is actually the labor force. So the governments will have to prioritize where they are, and usually they will be prioritizing employment. But the importance of having the classification of other forms of work is to know what are the contribution of other people in the economy, the contribution of the volunteer work in the economy, the contribution of unpaid training in the economy, and so on. So the contribution of some compulsory activities in the economy. So there will be various groups and various policies depending on the groups. So of course, ministries of labor are not going to make policies for all these groups. I doubt personally. So they will have to prioritize. But there will be other groups that are interested on supporting those different groups. Any other question?
Yes, sorry, Peter. Is it possible to we consider this all classification in my questionnaire? Because in my questionnaire and question 3.16, just we have 6 option, and this six option, a little of that is possible to calculate or analyze these categorical issues. My question is the standard oil question, they consider all of that possibility, or some countries they make like according to your demands.
Well, now I just mentioned how difficult it is actually to measure because we have really more questions than we used to have before. So a number of countries that are interested in all those categories, particularly countries that are interested in measuring dependent contractors, are in fact measuring it. countries that have issues of on-use consumption that are high, but they want to separate between on-use consumption and on-account workers in household market enterprises are also measuring it. I mean, countries like Mongolia, they are measuring, they are trying to measure this. Countries that have what we call gig economies, countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines are trying to measure it. And I mean trying, okay? I don't mean they are fully measuring it, to be honest with you. They are still trying to measure it. So as I said, there are not many countries that are fully measuring the whole categories here, to be honest with you. There are only a few countries. We are helping a couple of countries to measure. And as we were mentioning, as Eve was mentioning, just to calculate this category, you have a long do file to do this. So there are not many countries measuring. In your questionnaire, you won't have it. You can't put all this in one category, in one question. Forget it. That's the second part of your question. We used to have one question, we used to have one question with XA93, but now we have many questions to be able to measure XA18.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
I think that country, I think that country you mentioned that they have a regular labor force, force survey by each quarter. Yeah.
Yes, correct. Most of those countries.
Yeah,
yes.
in that case. Yeah.
And they have standalone survey. So for you, let me be honest, for you to be able to measure it, you have to increase your questionnaire considerably. So you could do it if you have only 2 topics or a standalone survey. So most of those countries have not only quarterly, but also a standalone, a separate LFS.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. So let's move now to the last slide so we can discuss after if there are any other questions. So the last slide for me is to show you 3 groups, 3 special groups that were identified by the resolutions, which are quite important for policy. And again, because you guys were asking me the question about policy. The first group is the home-based worker. You will be surprised, we didn't have a definition, statistical definition until 2018. And there are many organizations that are interested to know about home-based workers. And this is a broad category in many countries. We actually, some years ago, we did support Pakistan in running a home-based worker survey because they think that those categories are very high. I'm suspecting it could be high also in Afghanistan if it's high in Pakistan. I may be wrong, but I'm suspecting. So these are categories that are actually increasing rather than decreasing in many countries. So that category was defined by domain place, which is their own home. And usually they are independent workers and they don't have employees. And they are subcontracted by another organization to produce goods or services for that organization. So, and you have many of those groups in like the manufacture of wearing apparel, for example. You have in other product like sewing, providing supplies, people who are home-based workers who are cooking for construction sites, and so on. You have many examples of this. So the objective is to be able now to identify them in surveys if you are measuring, of course, based on 20th ICLS. If you are not measuring based on 20th ICLS, you may not find that group. So it's defined in the resolution, in the paragraph 110 of the resolution. And that's the other reason why also that the Excel had to be revised to provide statistics on those, that specific category. Another group, important group, for which we actually have a convention in the ILO, the convention C189. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the convention. That's a legal convention actually, which is once you ratify it, it's compulsory. Unlike the resolution that are statistical framework, or conventions are compulsory, so we have to measure them as well. So the Convention on Domestic Work, issued in 2011, had to oblige now the statistical community to come up with a statistical definition of what is domestic work. And that has been issued now inside the 20th ICLS resolution on work relationships. You have paragraphs 103 to 108, and we have the room document, which you can find on our website. It's basically all forms of work that are performed in or specifically for households. It has to be for households to provide services. And those services are mainly for consumption of that household or the household members. They can be performed with payment. This is what we used to call domestic work, what we understand by domestic work, so they can perform with payment. So these are employees inside the household, or agencies using domestic workers, or self domestic services provider, individual people who go into another household to provide domestic services. But they could also be, and this is the extension of the resolution, they could also be domestic work performed unpaid, either inside household members, but also by person volunteering to provide those services to family or their family members, to neighbors, or volunteering. So this is a broader to what we used to know as a domestic workers. It's added. But just for you to know, now there is a statistical definition of domestic workers. So if you are implementing the resolution, the 20th ICLS resolution, or if you have questions on the place of work, and on the good question, a good classification on ICIC revision 4, you could still actually produce the statistics of domestic work. We were producing, before this resolution, we were producing them based on the place of work and based on ICIC revision 4. Some divisions like 97 or 98, some specific divisions, or even on occupation on some sub-minor group 63. No, was it 63, Eve? Yeah, I think so. So those producing in agriculture, for example.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. But those were estimates. But now we have basically a definition and measurement, which will require more questions for us. And then the last category, and I wanted to mention this category for 2 reasons. One, because it has been identified. 2, I will tell you why. So the people called workers with multi-party work relationship. It's complicated. So I was mentioning that, we are trying to measure, the more complex the economy gets, the more we are trying to measure. We are making our life complicated, let me put it this way. But we have to try to measure the complexity of the economy. One of the forms of work that we are trying to measure is what we call multi-party work relationship. These are forms of work that involve 3 units, not just an economic unit and a person who is employed, but also a unit between the two. And that unit between the two can be an economic unit, or it can be a platform like the internet or an agency. So this is the complication why we call it multi-party work, because there are more than 2 parties. The classical work relationship is an economic unit, one economic unit, and somebody who is working in, with, or for that economic unit. Not anymore, because the complexity is leading us to one economic unit, and then a software or an intermediary agencies, and then a worker. And that's what we call the multi-party. So, and one of the form is what we call the outsourcing, for example, or even it's not only with private businesses, it's also often public businesses. The government, for example, one of the so-called government employment promotion schemes, I like that. So the government will be having officially using the people, but sending them to other unit, economic unit, because they are promoting employment. So this is also a form of multi-party work. But the common one is what we call the dependent contractors. These are people who are having their businesses, again, but the businesses is managed through a third economic unit, particularly using internet. And the reason why I'm mentioning it, and you can see this little star here, which means we are still developing methodological work to measure it. The reason why I'm mentioning it there is a subcategory here, dependent contractor, that you probably most of you have heard about it, which is called gig economies. And if you haven't heard about it, you'll hear about it. It's simply that that group was mentioned in the 2018, but there is no clear definition yet, so we are still working on it. All the people who are working in the internet, all the people who are using the internet as a job. I mean, I don't know if I can call it even a job, because it's not, well, it's their job, but it doesn't belong to them really. They don't control the business. These are all called dependent contractors. And among them, those who are depending, who are using something that is controlled by a third economic unit, a third party economic unit, particularly the internet, the platform, internet, it's called gig economy. So we haven't reached a final decision yet on how we can define that group. Many countries are trying to measure it. Again, examples of Malaysia and Indonesia, but there is no international standard yet. So we are still working on it. And maybe one day in 10 years, we will have a revision of this once we have a definition of this. Certainly not in 2023, because we are not there yet. So these are the three groups I was mentioning, which again, gives you an idea on how resolutions comes, because within one resolution, there will be groups that were not agreed, and then the statistical community will continue to develop methodological work on this. So that's it, what I wanted to mention. You have the two references on the ICLS and then the one on the 20th ICLS. That's it. Any question? If you have some questions, Peter, if you see the comment, I cannot see them. I see them if I stop sharing in the chat. Okay. Yeah, okay. No. You can hear me?
Yes, yes. So the comment is from Sapai, like the one who get income by having YouTube or TikTok channels.
Yeah, exactly. Or TikTok channels. So yes, because exactly, that's a good example, because that business doesn't belong to them. But as I was telling you, it's easy said than defined or measured. So we not only we haven't agreed yet on the overall definition that will fit all categories, but also once we agree, we will have to come up with the measurement, and that's where it gets complicated when we come up with the measurement. And that's what we were mentioning, that we are still trying to help countries to measure this. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't push you. This will be not my priority to push you to measure. My priority to ask you to measure will be the 19 ICLS, because that's very important. That responds to many variables, particularly in the SDGs. So that you need to implement. I mean, I would suggest then you discuss with Peter in your next survey, income and expenditure and LFS, you try to come up with core questions to implement the 19 ICLS. That you can do. You don't have to put in the 20th ICLS, because this is still more complicated. Don't go to me that I told you not to do that, but I would suggest, I suggest you to focus on the 19 ICLS first for your next survey. Any other comment or question? Okay, so I don't think we will have time to see the questionnaire, but just to mention that, again, we have standard questionnaire that Peter was mentioning, and I just wanted to show you the group, how it is. If you go in our website, how you will see it. I'm not sure if I'm still sharing.
Yes, you are.
I am. So can you see the questionnaire here?
No, right now we still see your PowerPoint.
Right, you see my PowerPoint. So I will have to go and share And then yeah, I have to quit this one. Stop sharing. How do you stop sharing? It's not. No, it doesn't show me how I quit stop sharing. No. Okay, that's, you see, okay, now I have it. I stop sharing this one and then I share another one. Okay. Okay, share, and then I want to share the questionnaire. Yeah, here. So,
Yeah,
can you see it
all
now?
good. Yes.
All good?
Yes.
Okay, so what Peter was mentioning this morning in the core labor force module that we have, the key important is the people who are employed at work. So he was mentioning it, and which are classic questions that you have. But he was also mentioning temporary absence, for example. If I click there, can you see temporary absence? You see it?
Yes. Yes,
Yes.
we see it.
So you see the various categories that we have in terms of temporary absence. So some of the reasons, if I highlight, do you see them? Some of the reasons that I'm highlighting in my...
Yeah, we see them.
These people are usually employed. They are usually employed. What we need to check, what we check quickly in our model questionnaire is to make sure that they are not involved in activity for unused consumption. But they are employed. So they are at work basically. Because they are, for those reasons, vacations, holidays, sickness, maternity, paternity, they have work. They are not currently at work, but they are employed. We are skipping here because we need to check whether they were involved in activity for pay or for profit, not just for unused consumption. So this is what Peter was mentioning in his discussion this morning. So if I go back to the main content here, which you will see when you have when you look at the questionnaire I sent. So again, the new thing that you need to change is Peter was mentioning this morning. What we call the you approve the cell. These are the group of questions. These questions are particularly asked for people who are in farming and agriculture, because it's unlikely that you will be producing vehicles for unused production. I wonder why you would have so many vehicles producing for unused consumption, or producing tools. Mostly you have a factory for clothes for unused consumption. In practice, you don't have those. So this check is done essentially for subsistence production, and subsistence production is usually in agriculture or fishing or gathering. So it's usually in the IC group 1s, 01 to 03. So this is the question that Peter was mentioning, the market orientation. We need to check if you produce only for sale or mainly for sale. Then you go automatically to employment. Okay? And we have many people who go to this question. We always have to check this. So because these people will be on unused production. That's what Peter was mentioning this morning. So, and another issue Peter mentioned was the characteristic of main jobs. No, actually he was mentioning the working time, underemployment, but that you have it already. So this is not new for you because you have it somehow, even if it's not basically like we have it in our module. So basically, these are the questions. You have to work additional hours for pay or profit. Here is for paid work. You have to be willing to. and you have to be available for that. I think it is somewhere in here. How many additional could we have started working? Yeah, this availability, if you are available to start working within the next week. See, this is formulated like the same availability we use even inside the job search. So this is it. Peter, any other question you were mentioning that they need to have in the questionnaire? I think the job search is, if the job search is fine, right?
Yes, the job search is fine indeed.
The job search is fine. Yeah, exactly. So that's it, as I wanted to mention. Again, to respond to one of the questions you were mentioning this morning, we have a standard questionnaire. We actually don't have only one standard questionnaire. We have 3 standard questionnaires. And among those questionnaires, we have also what we call, and see if I can share something with you. We have also what we call, let me if I can stop sharing this one, and then I share something else. Stop sharing, and then share again. Quickly, sorry about this. So here, share. You can see this slide I have here.
Yes.
So in the set of our LFS model questionnaire, just to describe you this, when you go into our website, you will see in the set what we call the paper assisted interviews and CAPI computer assisted personal interviews resources. We have both. And we even have a questionnaire builder, meaning a website where you can go, you click and select your options based on your economy, and you have, you build your own questionnaire. But inside we have the household core module, and we have the LFS module. And then in addition to that, we have what we call national guides. These are like manuals. And in addition, what you are asking this morning is this one. We have what we call the variable derivation flowchart and syntax, how you can produce it. So as I mentioned this morning, yesterday, Eve was showing you this derivation using Stata, but we have them as standard that you can use in any other software. We recommend countries to use Stata because it's cheaper anyway, it's most of the cheapest, and robust and quite easier. But you could also use SPSS or SAS or R, which is also free, by the way, using this derivation flowchart. So we have them. We have them particularly for one type of model that you find, which is called the job type. We have different models, particularly now free models, but we are developing, I think, another one. Why? Because the questionnaires we are building are based on the type of economy. If you are, most of the developed economy have what they call the job type economy. So they have mostly jobs. So that's what the question we start with. Did you have a job? But some countries are agriculture-based economy, so we focus on agriculture. So we start by asking the work in agriculture. And for small island countries, we use what we call the main activity type, which is also what we include in censuses. A very short module that goes into censuses is called the main activity type. So we start asking the main activity. So you will find all those questionnaires into our website. That's it for me. Peter, shall I hand over to you, back to you? For more questions or for closing?
I have a feeling we lost Peter.
Yeah, I didn't hear him. Yes.
Yeah.
Peter, are you still with us? Okay, maybe Peter, we lost him. So are there any other question or clarification before we?
Can you hear me now?
Ah, yes.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Hello?
We thought, yes, we can hear you.
Tete,
Yes.
in the slide that you are showing now,
Yes.
can you walk us through that website that show the flowchart and syntax for 1 or 2 minutes? How we can derive the variables using that flowchart and syntax?
Yeah,
Or how we can use it.
That if specialty, I will just show you where it is, but I won't be able to show you well, because you need to see the. Let me go into. Now I can see you. Let me go.
Can you hear me?
You didn't receive my PowerPoint from yesterday with the syntax?
Yes, if we received on the do files in the syntax.
Oh, okay, good.
I was interested and also raised this question earlier. So if you can have the standard questionnaire. So
yeah, the syntax for the standard, yes.
Yeah, the syntax.
So I'm trying. Let me try to stop sharing one, and I share something else. So I'm sharing the website now. Here. Share. You can see the website.
Yes.
I just did this one, the website. So you see what I was mentioning, we have puppy, copy, and so on. And the questionnaire builder, in fact. So in the model of this model, you have what we call where is it? Where is it? I need to check if it is inside this model actually. No, that's not here. I'm looking for what it is. Okay, let me go into puppy resources here. Where is our?
I'm not sure. I'm looking as well.
You're looking as well. Okay, I'm trying to get. It should be full set of. Yeah, we should be. Yeah, so the website has changed actually because they were all together before.
But I can send otherwise after the generic syntax.
Yeah. So resources, volunteer work, classes, changes, so job time. Normally they should be here. So all my colleagues are still building it, but if you see here, so they should be here normally. I just don't see why they are not here anymore. They should be here normally. So we will ask our colleagues if they don't have them anymore, they can put them back so that our colleagues, so you can see them. Because
yeah, I'm not sure why it's not there.
Yeah, so well, I used to have them downloaded actually, so I'm not sure if I can find them again somewhere where I downloaded them before.
I can share it with everyone this afternoon.
Yeah, you can share it with everyone, yeah, exactly. So we have them. I'm sure they are probably somewhere in the website. It's just because somehow something has somehow they should, let me see. If you download them, I can see them. You would probably have to download to see all of them. Okay, so yes, I have here in the download. Let me share this with you. This example derivation. Okay, quickly. Stop sharing and share something else.
Peter can't hear us.
Peter can't hear us.
He can hear us, but we can't hear him.
We can't hear him. So you can see my PDF?
Yes.
You see the PDF? So these are the derivation guides. And the derivation guides use, again, all the questionnaire and the key variable that Eve was mentioning, for example. And it starts by priority, employed person. So the definitions, how do you do it? The measurement, how do we do it? The questions, the question number, the flow chart, you can see?
Yes.
Colleagues can see the flow chart on how to do it, and then the syntax. Exactly like Eve was showing you yesterday. So this is generic. It's not necessarily the one in Stata, but this is meant to be introduced in any software. So every group, temporary absence, what do we do? Is here, employed, and then the software, employed. Sorry, the derivation, and so on. Actually, we have examples in Stata. This is an example in Stata. So we also have examples in Stata inside. Do you see my screen?
Yes, it was also developed in Stata. Yep.
Yeah. So these are the standard. The questionnaire I sent you, this is the standard software. Sorry, this is the standard do file for Stata. This is the LFS variable that Eve mentioned yesterday. Okay. So you have it on our website. You can download it actually. You have to download the whole group. Before it used to be separate. You have to download the whole group in the website. When you are here, let me stop sharing and share again this one. So when you are here, I'm sharing with you. You can see it. You have to download this whole group. If you are interested in the job type, which I think is what you are measuring, you are using in your LFS currently, you are starting by the job. So you will download the whole package. And then you can see, including there, the variation, the derivation. Any other question? Peter?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I was wondering what was going on. Okay.
Now we can hear you.
Yeah.
So we just went through quickly the questionnaire as well. I mean, we have taken 30 minutes more, which is
I was following, yes.
Yeah. So, but I think we have finished unless there are more questions, from colleagues.
Or to see how we can assist if they are starting the
the new LFS. So what I mentioned was to advise colleagues that for the next LFS, the priority should be to measure the 19 ICLS, and there we will come again to help you on building the questionnaire.
Right.
So we will come again to this more detailed, because here we have been summarizing. So we will come here to the more detailed, including the questions by question, even if they are the core questions only, and then the derivation.
Right.
So that's it for me. So Peter, I hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tite.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tite.
Thanks, Tite.
Thanks, colleagues. Yeah.
And of course, we need to thank the team, unless if they have any closing remarks. The way forward, if they have a program they want us to know about and where they think that we should get involved. Because I know we talked about if doing analysis of the current survey. Tite, you mentioned yesterday that we are ready to assist, even if they want us to assist in the analysis and writing some of the additional reports. We are readily available.
Yeah.
So would like to know if there's any other area of interest which we should focus on in the next few weeks. I know we are planning another webinar to look at child labor and also the development of a national standard classification of occupation. But in terms of the analysis and further work which you need to do, we need to hear from the team. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Peter, Tete, and the colleagues who joined this very informative, technical, and very important workshop and webinar. Colleagues from NSI and also colleagues from ILO Kabul office. First of all, thank you very much for arranging this very helpful and informative workshop. Sure, we will get back to you if we need any help or if we face any problem, or in case if we want to conduct a standalone or the next round of LFS. We will sure get back to you to assist us in designing the standard questionnaire. And in terms of the future, as we exchange through emails, we also have data on child labor, and we will need your assistance in coordination with the UNICEF on how we can build on the indicators for the child labor. So that will be, I guess, a coordinated activity between NSI and ILO and UNICEF. We'll get into that in the near future, I guess. And in terms of the analysis, yes, I guess we need your help if you are writing the report, the detailed report, and we will back to you hopefully in near future for your assistance. Again, thank you very much, and we will be in touch with the group and see you in near future.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you so much. Thanks also to colleague in Sapai for also contacting us. So this helps us to understand also, you know, what progress you are doing. And I mean, according to Eve's assessment, that it looks like already you are progressing. Thanks a lot. And then bye-bye. So Peter is going to be our focal point for you guys. So any contact you ask Peter, so, and then he can contact us for us to help you. Also, you don't hesitate to go to our office in Kabul if one of us is not responding. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to send you all the recordings. I'll be sending you a link and all the presentations.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you very much, Peter. And we look forward to receive the video records for our later use in revisiting all the things that have been discussed here.
Yes, yes. I'll be sending it today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
If you could send me also the list of the participants, their details.
Sure, Peter. Peter. I'll send that.
Okay.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Have a good evening.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, my evening is starting now.